thank you so much to the conveners for inviting me to speak. And shout out to Cecilia. I'm in Toronto right now. So I'm going to describe an encounter that's driven my work for about a decade, seeking to arrive at a precise determination of exactly what kind of a drawing, a music notation is. So whatever properties it might have as a uniquely resilient drawing system.
Please, sorry, could you please put on present mode so that we could see slides? We are just in slide sorting mode. Oh, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So I was walking through the New York Public Library, this about a decade ago, which that place occasionally pulls items from its extensive archives and it stalls them for visitors to examine. Among the things I saw that day, there was a small scrap of paper on the wall, something a little bit like what you're looking at right now, a yellowed irregular parchment marked over with figures and fractured marks. This hand-sized fragment was attributed to the great German composer Johann Sebastian Bach and was framed and hung as any painter's drawing might be. And it triggered in me the sort of moment of connection and clarity that I think we hungrily seek through experience with works of art and music. While the purpose of that little page was clear, it would be clear to anyone who had even casual knowledge of the common Western staff music notation. What I also saw was a loose, compelling bit of play with pigment. So fluid all over marking that I recognized from my own sketching practices, not to mention the graphic activities of many others. This is to say that while I knew what I was looking at, the utility of the thing momentarily sifted to the bottom of my recognition, leaving instead only its trace presence as drawing. This doesn't seem like much, but it is enough, I think, for an artist to begin the work. In my sideways glance at Bach's drawing, so the glance of a visual artist with a musical background, I saw something like the indexical percussion of a Cy Twombly blended with the irresolution of a drawing by Tapies, rather than the crypticism of the staff notation marked down with the mechanical consistency of an engraver's stylus. As a visual artist, I've worked with a wide range of drawing systems, pictures, and diagrams. And as a serious amateur musician, I'm at least familiar with the principles of the music notation. So after that encounter, I asked myself what confusion underlay this momentary misperception. How and why did that small fragment speak so brightly in two voices? Also, how does a music drawing relate to other visualization methods? And how is it that we are enabled to fix and refix the multidimensional complexes of musical performance onto the flat page? As he's done so often in my working life, John Cage, the American composer, contributed a playful simplicity to the framing of the problem. It's a matter of grasping the relations between paper and music. It's a common enough observation among any of us who draw seriously that it is a dynamic interface between thinking and making. In this view, the artist scribe doesn't merely output some reactionary contours. Rather, they work with pencil and paper to generate moments of analysis and reconstruction in the problem space, nurturing insights, revisions of potential, given the goals of the work. And of course, there is now a substantial and growing technical literature supporting these studio-based observations, laying out the values of drawing as a cognitive instrument and as a discursive boundary object. The neuroscientist Vinod Goel, for example, has explained the vitality of drawing in terms of its provision of a kind of handheld dialectic across symbol systems. Similarly, the design researcher Barbara Tversky describes drawing as a special class of conversion process. And finally, the literary translator Richard Pavir has described the act of writing in his practice as a kind of visual machine for stitching together disparate expressions. All these vivid descriptions really do is describe how we draw to render our worlds executable, calculable, but above all legible across social barriers. And all those also bear on my confused apprehensions around Bach's autography. Unpacking what's happening in the staff music notation, like the one that propelled me along this working path. Relating it to other drawing systems, we need to start with the idea that to make any drawing is an act of evaluation that's essentially digital. It's a kind of embodied quantification. For what it's worth, the most explicit application of this measurement principle at the heart, I believe, of all drawing is geometrical drawing, geometry. That partly visual mathematical method developed to gauge reality in the graphical terms of wireframe illustrations of dimension, incidence, and potential. Whereas a character string formula or an alphabetic drawing writes forward line by line, or a picture puts too much on the table in terms of potential, a well-formed geometrical representation will show us problem and solution together, allowing induction into the deductive logic of a math problem, for example. Geometrical drawing is as much speculation, therefore, as it is analysis. Through making or reading the inscription, we might step through natural dimensions into more nuanced spaces, or we may insert a wedge into moribund thinking and discover something new. By thinking over such graphics, for example, we've moved our cultures from explorations of natural principles of location to computational visualizations and networks meant to allow us a sensate experience of a different species of organic system, which is to say information. It's worth noting, it is worth noting that 1,000 years ago, the Benedictine monk Guido d'Arezzo, generally credited with the invention of the staff system, that simple system that we torture 6-year-olds with, saw a surprising practical consequence of his graphic innovation. Previous systems like the planchon directed looms, like the ones that are on the screen, used these autographic flourishes marked above the lyric, like these, to show performers the shapes of their vocal intonations. You can imagine that they thus required lots of time and effort to learn. And there's simply too much interpretive potential in these curls and dots and other marks to be truly efficient, at least as pedagogical instruments. However, using Guido's geometry with its interval scaling timeline and vertical pitch space, encoded simple metaphors which propose that some particular pitch is above or below or across, and that pitches are responsive to each other, that sound can swell or diminish, that rhythm is transition, and that music is something to be organized. Using that system, his vocalists were able to learn new performances in 2 days, not 2 months. The control lexicon of dots and lines written into a grid converts music into information with the added properties of easy reproduction and portability. But while there may be recognizably diagrammatic qualities to the staff notation, there's also something else at play. Typically, a diagram has a specific referent for its schematic image, some external target in either physical or logical systems. But if a music notation is just a species of diagram, then its referent is something that's not yet occurred and may not occur at all. It's not a closed system. The target is coming. Ultimately, the notation is built for legibility. We trace paths through the scheme, forming an image of experience, and communicating performance parameters to enact its content somewhere, sometime in the real world. Presented with constellations of points, lines, and shapes, legible, I guess, in the same way that a ship's navigator might read the night sky, the staff notation persists 1,000 years old. Even in our age of digital tools, it retains its values in listening, understanding, and encouraging individuals to participate in the wide range of communities that benefit from its use. Over the centuries of its primacy, the system has allowed users to see music as a category of experience apart from the grander rituals of its actual performance, to see it as knowledge, to approach music as an enterprise of literacy, and to read music, moreover, to write it. Drawings speak amongst themselves and to their makers and to other users, and that crosstalk is the source of their flourishing in human industries. Just compare the wireframe computations of a geometer against the scores of the composer in the notation. This, by the way, is a page from Beethoven's notebooks. Both systems offer a heuristic for phenomenal experience, representing incidents and change through quantitative operations on qualities. But a music notation's real significance, what a score is for, is to illuminate an indeterminate future. Mapping the organization of sound onto the page, the staff music notation, I think, wonderfully exemplifies the mongrel spirit of drawing. It blends pictorial, diagrammatic, and textual schemes, allowing users to represent principles rather than merely the entities and relations of diagrams, pictures. Orienting its users to potential, the notation channels evanescence up and down and across the phlegmatic page and then back. With its combinatorial form, the system bursts through mere denotation to become a connotative drawing system, where passages of great poetry can form in the relations between the tracery and the performance of the tracery. The cognitive tool of drawing brings the logic of literacy up against the physical experience of air pressure waves. We're enabled to read and write with them. This, by the way, this image is the same as the back one I showed earlier. It's just cleaned up by the engraver. A musical score directs us to some segment of an uncertain future with the value-added capability of being played back either on and off its readout. Composition in a music notation amounts to drawing in a future conditional or subjunctive tense. It is thus a true space-time drawing, and probably the only such inscription in spite of cycling art world jargon. This is to say that in any form of music notation, not simply the staff notation, time is not merely that existential, inescapable dimension in which we find ourselves, nor is it just some target concept or axis of measurement, as in a histogram or a scatter plot graphic. Rather, time is a character in the scheme. So in reply to Cage, in the intersection of paper and music, aspects of our experience are explored quite by hand in a true space-time conjunction. Ultimately, my response to Bach's manuscript reflects three simple desires: to embrace the abundance of drawing, to trace performance, hold it in hand, and to make more. So here's a short description of one of those making more moments. This is work I've done towards making an instrumental gesture of silence, to make it legible and then portable, to make, in a manner of speaking. Keep in mind that I'm not talking about silence as some obscure psychological palimpsest. Rather, I want to show you a method for scoring silence in the voice. In brief, as I just reviewed music notations and the visual codes we devised to represent it, they're inscriptions of a sort, but while we sing the one in concert, actually conversing with singing and song, with the other we orchestrate, calculate, nudge, and project from a place of thought. Music notation is a truly hybrid image text, a bit diagrammatic, a bit pictorial, and a bit like writing all at once. It behaves a little like a control interface, allowing users to burst through mere denotation into a connotation. Of course, silence is not something to be written. It's a feature of our psychology. It's an apperception, making sense of absence. In my research for this, the linguist Dennis Curzon in 2007 gave me a useful typology of silence and its kinetic roles in social exchanges. It's the stillness of listening, reflective pauses or withdrawal, displays of dissent. But for the sake of this brief account of a kind of a sprawling ongoing art project, let me offer a perspective on silence up front. Silence is constraint. That is, we speak, expressing air through channels of bone and flesh, which restrict airflow as much as they allow its passage. So this is silence not as the spaces between words or patterns of stress or mere quietude, but an artifact of the mechanics of vocal production. It is true that silence moves us. It's present somehow in the timing of the skilled orator, comedian, singer. But I'm referring here to the channeling and triggering of breath through the jaws, throats, and lips that produce that work. In my working life as an artist, the American poet Wallace Stevens has been a source of great pleasure for how the writing feels. Oops, let me move on. Here we go. Wallace Stevens, how the writing feels, so to speak, in the throat, in its cadence and figuring. In this excerpt, I love the poet's image of the voice rising from the firmament, coming through us in the pitching and prosody of vocalizing. Language and the voice, an alchemical compound. It suggests the work of the artist is to watch the reaction, reporting on or at least attending to its effects. Meanwhile, in John Cage's music philosophy, the ground is impossible silence. Consider 4 minutes and 33 seconds, his infamous silent piece, which is a performance of nothing, excerpting the quiet of everything else. Finally, Michel Serres, philosopher of science, writes about embodied circuits of noise and signal. Settling on basic, and I'd say graphical terms, therefore, silence is defined in my work in this project as the presence of inaudible characters. So here's an artist question. How can we draw incipients? How might we visualize Stephen's dialogue between the ground and the will? How can we score something not present yet also not absent? There are musical silences that happen in the unspooling spaces between sound production gestures in an orchestra, for example. But is there a positive notation for this critical issue of communication other than the courtesies of extended rests or the bird's eye of fermata, or the fascinating paradox of phatic additions to a text? It's not really an it, but can I compose with it? For a very much too quick summary of a rather untidy research process, I worked to develop a sensible pair of system predicates for the grammar of a vocal notation for silence. The first builds on the commonly held view that human speech is vitally timbral. We express ourselves to each other in networks of vocal tones in concert with our fellow citizens. And in those expressions, timbre delivers a lot of information about sound source and intention, among other things. The second predicate came out of playful sketchbook drawing. So actually from this page on the right here, there isn't any clear explanation for the inklings I followed towards the use of alphabetic characters, other than to say eureka. In Curzon's typology, silence is a dynamic sign performed in a social semiotics, but as I played in my journal, these characters sort of murmured at me from the page. They were dancing together and I caught them doing it. I was doodling in the spaces between word, image, and sound, and in fact, I think I doodled my way towards joining the poet and composer in the venerable idea that music is always an art of the voice, to be spoken aloud, proclaimed, or whispered. So drawing together these two rules, timbre and the alphabet, I came to understand that vowels are breath. Vowels are the colors in the envelope. Vowels begin in our diaphragms and fire from our throats. Conversely, consonants stay put. They're the corners and seams of that envelope, determining attack and volume that connect and combine, creating the conditions of legibility for the utterance. Consonants pitch breath. If they produce any sound at all, it is incidental in friction as passage by and against flesh, bone, and teeth. Just try to make the sound of the letter T, for example. Without airflow, all we have are the positions of the tongue and the palate, arranged but unable to intone. In my developing system for notating silent singing, the ready-made character set of consonants are the crossroads between timbre and the alphabet. So not a pause or a reflective moment, not withholding, but the written instructions for those small actions which steer our breath into speech. This is literally a musical grammar of incipients. So the envelope empty, as it were, ready for filling. Learning to make these drawings, I pitched letter fields across each other along the axes of the page, and interference patterns emerged from the skews of the markings. I think you can see it in this one. Those H's begin to sort of spin around each other. Channeling the fricatives and sibilants of speech acts through the material logic of drawing. In this early score, a moment of spatialization occurred where the typesetting turned pictorial. The letters began to spin around each other, rolling across what I saw as a threshold for potential performance. As an aside, I remember a childhood daydreaming activity performed most memorably in Sunday Catholic church services, to which I apologize to my mother. I was watching the typeset marks or printed pages self-organize, becoming just such spatialized images. I believe the impact of these drawings on me is connected to that memory of exquisite bored dreaming. As opportunities to both see and hear music, they give us a line-by-line organization of glottal and labial gestures. The quiver and potency while never quite articulated. Thus, the project title Interference refers both to the act and the gestalt effect of reading the pages. Now, I think the music comes in the crosstalk between our natural pattern-seeking tendencies and our comprehensive attachments to typographical conventions. Thus, their actual performance presents some beautiful challenges. Performing silent music is a tantalizing possibility. Certainly, computational practices prevent powerful pathways worth pursuing, but not for me. As always, I focus on drawing as the fundamental act that permits even the computation itself. By rendering breathlessness, is it possible that these drawings give us a possible notation for silence? As a longtime admirer of Cage, this is in effect a consummation devoutly to be wished. In the end, in their performance as music, they may not actually be scores for a vocalist, but for a dancer or an actor, as the body's dynamics are the terms of those arts, even possibly in the closed private spaces of the mouth and throat. The scores themselves oscillate between pictures and writing, between vision and audition, exemplifying the capacities of drawing to operate in the spaces between languages. Furthermore, exploiting drawing as a thinking practice, I hope you can see something like a grammar that renders silence articulable. I see them as a kind of pantomime of unrequited sound, a dance of incipience. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
David. May anybody have any question or comment on this issue? I would like to mention just how well another dimension of drawing is being pointed out, and another way how drawings could be applied also was expressed by David in the very well way. But anybody, any question, any comment? If nobody asks, yeah, please. Yeah, please take place at microphone. Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. Great work. I really loved looking at it. I was wondering, I saw their prints, most of them, right? Or I would like to know something about the materiality then, and whether you've also used like immersive settings to experience the drawings. Thank you.
Well, I'm echoing you, so I hear myself twice. Thank you so much. The scale and the materiality of this all for me works. I have a fairly traditional process, and it involves developing the loosest of sketches and tightening them up a bit and figuring out where things go. It's a process of composition that any visual artist will recognize. The part of the magic of the traditional staff music notation, that little system that you probably understand even in a basic way, it's portable. It fits in a book. It fits in your pocket, and that's important to me. My study of music notations, obviously, in the 20th century and the 21st century, the idea of notating music burst open with all kinds of experimental approaches. But what interests me about music notation is the shareability and the portability, and the fact that one of the staff music you can compose a piece of music in the staff notation and then email it to somebody in Singapore, and that person will know exactly what you mean and will be able to reproduce that performance. not perfectly, but who cares about that? So the portability, the shareability is important to me. So having it in hand is important. So I've never really done a kind of immersive installation of this work. What I have done is hand a piece of paper with a notation on it to a singer and ask the singer, can you perform this? Because once the performance happens, you are essentially in the immersive space, a larger social space, a space that includes every corner of the room that you're in. That's the beauty of music. A musical performance is immersive in that way. So I hand a scrap of paper to a singer, and the singer says, yes, I can, or no, I cannot. And that's the extent of the scale of the work that I do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David, again, and